Chapter 9. Devil's Advocate. In that moment, the many masks of Anton LaVey seemed to melt before my eyes. Mad scientist, carnival barker, intellectual broker. All of these melt, then form again, one sinking into the quicksand of the next. And when he turns to face me, it is the most terrifying experience in my life. Yet, I'm unable to tremble. For I am gazing only at sleight of hand, at a face without a definable shape, a face both as charming and as monstrous as any I could possibly imagine. The face of the Antichrist. Dick Russell, Anton LaVey, the Satanist who wants to rule the world. Argosy, 1975. In the midst of Woodstock, Vietnam protesters, tattered blue jeans, and LSD gurus turning on the world, it became LaVey's role to speak up for satanic issues. Perhaps modern Satanism never would have reared its barbed head had it not been for LaVey's frustration with the barefoot, slogan-spewing love children. I considered the 60s and 70s a barren, aesthetically destructive era. America, especially San Francisco, was a mire of ignorance, stupidity, and egalitarianism. I created my own world, the Church of Satan. That's the only way I could survive. It turned out to be a real cudgel on the head of mainstream society at that time. Without us, there would have been no counterculture. All the Ken Keseys and Timothy Learys did was attach great importance to the worthless. It may have been precisely the era for LaVey to find an appreciative audience. In magic, Anton says, if the timing is right, you can say one word and it will create the act you will want. So, it was with LaVey's first book, The Satanic Bible. I never set out to be a writer. I wrote The Satanic Bible out of disgust. I looked for years for a no-bullshit, how-to book on black magic without the protection of the pentagram and evoking the names of Jesus. I couldn't find anything like what I had in mind, so I wrote one. Much of the book had already been circulated on brightly colored stock within the Church of Satan, as introductory essays in Satanism. Certain members with connections in publishing felt LaVey had potential for a wider readership, and the editors they spoke to were just as enthused. It was a fluke, Anton agrees. The editor I worked with at Avon Books was extremely supportive. Hardly changed a thing from my original, except for grammatical errors. Didn't touch the content. It probably couldn't be published today. But that's a moot point because there wouldn't be this overcompensating religious climate if the Satanic Bible hadn't been published in the first place. The book has gained a certain amount of respectability during its 21 years in print. It's been required reading in certain college sociology classes, with excerpts of the Satanic Bible included in college texts since the early 70s. A musician, first and foremost, LaVey writes with an ear for rhythm, finality, and cadence, choosing some phrases more for sound than strict meaning. He credits writers like Ben Hecht, H.L. Mencken, Horatio Alger, and Nathaniel West as major influences, as well as the notorious governor of Louisiana, Huey Long, the closest thing to an honest politician that's ever been elected. LaVey's style is tight and direct, informative, with enough earthy humor thrown in to keep from sounding pompous. People close to LaVey have quipped he should put a handbook of satanic parables, jokes he uses to illustrate aspects of his cynic's philosophy. Those who have been around him for any length of time develop a shorthand of significant punchlines, often after the joke itself has been forgotten. Anyone without a sense of humor, says LaVey, is too pretentious to be a good magician. After writing the Satanic Bible, LaVey continued his satanic triptych with The Complete Witch, or What to Do When Virtue Fails, which was heavily edited by Dodd Mead before its publication in 1970, since reprinted as The Satanic Witch. Finally, in 1972, The Satanic Rituals was published by Avon as a companion to LaVey's first book, a comprehensive collection of history's best authentic black magic rituals. After establishing the Church of Satan, then codifying his brand of sin in his 3 books, LaVey did his share of traveling around the country for talk shows, radio shows, and interviews with local papers. Articles constantly appeared in newspapers around the world as editors sent their reporters to find out why everyone was buzzing about this San Francisco sorcerer. LaVey got major coverage in U.S. magazines like Cosmopolitan, Time, Newsweek, 17, and was on the August 24, 1971 cover of Look. After meriting several documentaries and wax figures of himself exhibited in a dozen museums in various parts of the world, cast at Madame Tussauds Waxworks in London, cutting a rather unique album of the first recorded Black Mass, writing a long-running Letters to the Devil column in the National Insider, and performing an elaborate on-camera ritual on Johnny Carson's 7th anniversary show to summon success for the upcoming year, LaVey moved from being a local San Francisco character to being an international celebrity. Reactions to what the ex-Arch of Hell had to say ranged from decidedly hostile to immediately supportive. Among the first articles written about the new High Priest of Satan was Shayna Alexander's The Feminine Eye column in February 1967, then running in Life magazine. Titled, "The Ping is the Thing," the article opens by describing a ping that is often heard when idly listening to the morning news broadcast. This ping seems to signal that something funny or weird, or maybe even profound, may have just occurred, although one is never sure. Alexander goes on to give a wonderfully engaging account of LaVey and his activities in those early days, describing, as she says, the jarring clash between the exotic and the utterly banal. Besides Rosemary's Baby, the movie which LaVey has said did for the Church of Satan what The Birth of a Nation did for the Ku Klux Klan, complete with recruiting posters in the lobby, there were a few other films made about or including LaVey. The Brother Buzz Show, an educational documentary-type series for kids, showcasing unusual animals and people, devoted an episode to LaVey and his lion, Tagar, before LaVey even started the Church of Satan. This delightful profile is narrated by Tagar, Pat McCormick, who describes LaVey, not yet shorn of his hair, as a hypnotist and psychic investigator, then goes on to take us through a typical day in the life of a man and his lion. There is some wonderful footage of the inside of the Black House, as well as of Diane, Carla, and a toddling Xena. Because of its innocent enthusiasm aimed at evoking wonderment in children, the episode proves to be one of the best portraits of LaVey to date. Satanist, an extensive feature-length documentary on the Church of Satan, was released at theaters across the country early in 1970, often playing on a double bill with another movie in which Anton appeared, Kenneth Anger's Invocation of My Demon Brother. The ads for Satanist, showcasing LaVey's scowling countenance, promised bloody, sexually explicit rituals. In true William Castle fashion, cautions were phrased in the most serious manner. Satanist is the most pertinent and perhaps the most shocking film of our time. But it's definitely not a movie for everyone. If you choose not to see it, we will understand. Sadly, several other foreign documentaries by Germany's Florian Furtwängler and France's Victor Vicus that were made of LaVey's church never got American distribution. Different versions of Luigi Scattini's Angeli Bianca Angeli Nera were released around the world, the American version titled Witchcraft 70. The segment on LaVey and the Church of Satan was one of the few included in every version. Ray Lawrence, Satanist, was available for a time on videotape and has long been the only footage of the church available for TV producers to use when describing the evils of Satanism to concerned studio audiences. Late 1970 found Anton LaVey promoting his newly released The Complete Witch on Donahue and other shows across the country, appearing, on many occasions, with Arthur Lyons, author of The Second Coming, Satanism in America. Lyons, who has since written a series of hard-boiled detective novels, covers LaVey extensively in The Second Coming. Anton Zander LaVey, despite his accusers, is a sincere and dedicated man, demanding sincerity and dedication from his members. He is mobilizing for a purpose: to control, to gain power through the already existing social channels. "I visualize a day," he told me calmly as we talked one afternoon at his home, "when tridents and pentagrams are thrust into the sky from church roofs instead of crosses. I have a legacy to fulfill, and it will be fulfilled." Perhaps it will, so long as the group does not lose sight of its present aims and methods. The Second Coming has been established text on Satanism until Lyons wrote another book in 1988 titled Satan Wants You, which updated his first book, providing fresh material on Anton LaVey, and dispelling much of the hysterical claims of animal sacrifices and ritual abuse of children, which have been blamed on Satanists over the years. Newsweek magazine has done a few articles covering LaVey's exploits. One from August 16, 1971, entitled Evil Anyone?, was already raising questions about suspected satanic crimes that have plagued LaVey from his organization's beginnings. Anton's answer has been consistent over the years. Satanism, he insists, is developing two circles: an elitist group, which I always intended my church to be, and the faddists, who are becoming Satanists because it's the thing to do. Discovering murder isn't on Satanism's list of required sacraments. Diligent reporters have to find something else to entice thrill-seeking readers. Indeed, far from preaching sexual or political anarchy, LaVey describes his goal as the creation of a police state in which the weak are weeded out and the achievement-oriented leadership is permitted to pursue the mysteries of black magic. Because of LaVey's nude female altars, more than a few fetishists wrote letters of inquiry addressed to the red-headed nude altar. There were plenty of men's magazines willing to cover the Church of Satan, having a juicy, ready-made excuse for nudie shots. Though most of the stories accompanying the pictures were limited to recounting ancient myths of devil's orgies and naked nubile acolytes tied to sacrificial altars. Several were written by Burton Wolfe, who eventually wrote a much-needed biography of LaVey in 1974. Wolfe's vision of LaVey is clear and concise, packing a wealth of information into his book, The Devil's Avenger. An established writer with 3 previous books to his credit, Wolfe explained his interest in LaVey this way. One of the reasons I became involved with LaVey, and eventually wrote about him, was that he did make sense. I first heard him speak at a Sexual Freedom League meeting in 1967 and was immediately impressed by his knowledge and practicality. All of the other occultists I had met, heard about, or read of turned out to be frauds, quacks, and madmen. But not LaVey. He may be the first occultist ever to work out a rational and even a partly scientific basis for his beliefs and rites. Burton Wolfe joined Anton's church for a brief period in 1968 when, as he writes, LaVey was still in his prankish stage. The rituals and parties in his black house were full of fun and humor, and I thoroughly enjoyed capers such as playing the role of the director of the insane asylum and the madness of logic right. Wolfe continued to fan interest in LaVey with articles up into the early 80s, and though he had to drop out the Church of Satan because he felt it was evolving into a harsh, vindictive, crypto-fascist-style organization, Wolfe wrote a comprehensive introduction to the Satanic Bible, which has served as the only biographical reference on LaVey since The Devil's Avenger went out of print. Someone paid me a great compliment long ago, LaVey recalls, when he said about me, "He's no fun anymore." That's when I knew I was getting somewhere. This was when the church was 2 or 3 years old, and I realized people were beginning to regard us as more than just fun and games. Being a public devil could open doors in the right places. LaVey developed an intimate friendship with David Pledel Bouverie, the Vickers munitions heir and godson of Sir Basil Zaharoff. Bouverie had become a legendary bon vivant in his own right, with his estate serving as a gathering point for the wealthy and notorious few. Through him, LaVey met Lady Sylvia Ashley, Clark Gable's widow, whom Anton describes as a well-bred, pleasant, pigeon-breasted woman, much like Elwood P. Dowd's mother in Harvey. LaVey also met Abigail Folger's mother. Abigail was the first baby born under hypnosis, since Zena had also been born under the same circumstances. Diane and Mrs. Folger had enough in common to strike up a ready friendship. Alan Watts went skeet shooting with LaVey once, and Anton found him to be rather absent-minded, but a nice enough guy. There was a haziness about him, like Leary, whom I met on a Donahue show when he was still broadcasting from Cleveland. Leary's daughter was with him, and she seemed almost articulate. In Dr. Nixon's words, he was a simple soul. By contrast, Bouverie's enclave also established LaVey's meeting Joseph Cotton and his wife, Pat Medina, who once assisted LaVey in shoving a bulky Tagar back into his carryall when the big lion decided he was reluctant to leave the estate. Speaking of Cotton, he is first and foremost a circus man, a real trooper who has an uncanny kind of perception of the world and human nature. It's no accident, and not acting ability alone, that he's played the roles he has. As might be expected, LaVey finds he can communicate with the highest strata of people best, no matter how supportive a lower wattage person might be. Support alone is not enough, LaVey confesses. Understanding is primary. And you can't get that without a modicum of intelligence. I don't appreciate being supported for all the wrong reasons, with no regard for underlying motivations. That's less than helpful. I don't need warm bodies just to fill the pews, fill out membership figures, or make charitable donations. In most cases, it's a drain of vital energy from me, not them. I would like to think that presidents and world leaders of any kind would have some special appreciation for someone who really understands their roles. The pressures, the constituents they have to satisfy, That requires satanic perception or acumen. Even though a leader always appreciates his supporters, who may be very much with him and sympathetic, they may not have that added level of empathy or rapport. When it comes right down to it, on a scale of 1 to 10, I have an intuitive feeling I'd find a greater rapport, share a deeper understanding with the Pope than I would for someone like John Kennedy, for example. I don't perceive that John Kennedy had much I might relate to. When it's right, it often goes without saying that we share the same likes and dislikes in music, movies, books, fascinating places. We could practically talk in shorthand. I couldn't see that with Kennedy. I could sympathize with the pressures of his position, but not for the man himself. It's a frequency. In the early to mid-70s, LaVey spent some time back in Los Angeles, living in Jane Mansfield's Pink Palace at 10,100 Sunset Boulevard, which had been acquired by another Church of Satan member after Jane's death. Anton's associations in the movie business from years before now expanded to include still more actresses, actors, writers, directors, and producers. Movie stars found it easy to align themselves with LaVey and his philosophy. They always like to experiment a bit more than average people. LaVey found a very welcome, unabashedly admiring atmosphere, with people accepting him for what he was, rather than challenging his dramatics or theatrics. Hollywood glitterati could sympathize with LaVey, being accused of posturing, when in reality he was just being true to his archetypal self. And LaVey, in turn, found himself energized by familiar sights and friends in Hollywood. Two of LaVey's Hollywood friends, director Milo Frank and his wife, actress Sally Forrest, owned the infamous Jean Harlow/Paul Byrne suicide house that Jay Sebring happened to be living in at the time of the Manson murders. They approached LaVey with a tempting deal to trade residence in the house for filming opportunities, and Anton's now famous Victorian in San Francisco. At the time, the LaVeys had already come under scrutiny so soon after the murders, and felt it wouldn't be prudent to create any more connections for reporters to exploit than they already had. LaVey has since felt a modicum of regret he didn't avail himself for the opportunity. Supposedly, the house had a curse on it, with secret panels and a history to rival LaVey's notorious Victorian. Other homes in Hollywood were also available to him, and still are. LaVey maintained his residence in San Francisco, motoring up and down the coast sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. Carla and Zena stayed in San Francisco most of the time, usually attended by one or more of LaVey's members. Carla, then in her early 20s, was following in her father's footsteps, giving lectures in Satanism and taking a degree in criminology. Being the devil's representative on Earth not only opened celebrities' doors to LaVey, but many of their hidden hearts and minds as well. Secrets became known to him. Secrets someone could only tell the devil himself, without risking rejection or disapproval. It has always been a part of the mythos that, as the keeper of the gates of hell, a fit and proper devil must bear the burden of men's wickedness, hidden from other mortal men. LaVey doesn't balk at this aspect of his role. Yet, true to his unwritten underworld code, he is reticent to disclose that which, he feels, is better left hidden. I wouldn't stick my neck out and say what I know. I'm already unpopular. I wanted to expose myths at one time, but the real terrifying part was people's reactions to enlightenment. The myths weren't nearly as frightening as what happened when I tried to expose them. In 1973, a year after the Satanic Rituals was released, Publishers decided the public had heard enough satanic thought. When LaVey's agent presented his next book, The Devil's Notebook, at the annual International Book Fair in Frankfurt, enthusiastic bids were placed for the manuscript. But when editors brought it back to New York to take a closer look, LaVey was quietly put off. Portions of the unpublished work surfaced over the years in the satanic newsletter, The Cloven Hoof, but it was considered by major houses to be too inflammatory for the general public. One publisher, after reading a chapter on lycanthropic transformation, exclaimed, "Why, if this was published, the streets would be running red." Membership in the Church of Satan expanded steadily. LaVey tried to include visits with his constituents around the globe, wherever he traveled, blessing them with papal visits to their grottos, where he was greeted with an excess of pomp and black capes. It became rather embarrassing after a while. I'd step off the plane and there they'd be, all huddled together to meet me in their black velvet robes and capes with huge baphomets around their necks. Many of our grassroots people didn't know much about subtlety then, or decorum. I was trying to present a cultured, mannered image, and their idea of protest or shock was to wear their lodge regalia into the nearest Denny's. At the same time, Anton was beginning to experience the negative aspects of being the center of high-profile publicity. LaVey was besieged from both sides. From those who didn't like what he had to say, and from fans who created problems by just wanting to hang around. After pictures and descriptions of Reuben, LaVey's malformed skeleton, appeared in Paris Match, the doctor who had treated the man with Paget's disease before he died called the UCSF Medical Center and demanded they retrieve the skeleton. Though the hospital officials were hesitant to do it, the doctor raised such a fuss they were forced to take Reuben away from LaVey. That was a real shame. The skeleton got more attention and appreciation with the Church of Satan than he ever could have otherwise. We rescued him. He probably would have been destroyed among the wreckage. Even in a museum, he would just be one more skeleton among hundreds. With us, he was special. LaVey had a similarly unhappy experience with Tagar, his Nubian lion. Anton kept Tagar with him as his constant companion for 3 years, much to the delight of the Bay Area media and schools, where Tagar often visited to promote goodwill toward wild animals. Neighborhood parents brought their children by LaVey's odd home to pet the lion. But once the Church of Satan was founded, a small band of LaVey's neighbors petitioned the city to get rid of Tagar. Their complaints: he was potentially dangerous to the community. He littered LaVey's backyard with large, smelly bones. They pressed police to arrest LaVey on charges of allowing his lion to make loud or unusual noises. Finally, the LaVeys were forced to donate the 500-pound Tagar to the San Francisco Zoo in 1967. The separation was wrenching for both man and lion, and LaVey leveled a curse on those responsible. Within a year, several of the neighbors who had been the most vocal about Tagar had either moved away, died, or disappeared. Tagar sired many cubs both in San Francisco and on actress Tippi Hedren's ranch in Acton, California, where Tagar eventually lived out the last of his years. In her book, The Cats of Shambhala, Hedren described Tagar as a good but fierce papa. Tagar died in 1981 on Walpurgisnacht. In the beginning of the church's activities, LaVey freely printed his address and phone number on posters, fake folded money to be left lying on the street as a promotional gimmick, and allowed reporters to print his address as they wished. I don't like to think I was naive during that period of my life. I just wanted the Church of Satan to be honest, open, and above board. I also had a dream of being able to work out of my own home, as most of my friends did who were writers or performers. I envisioned the pleasure of rolling out of bed and having your work right there waiting for you, without having to get in your car and drive to an office or another location. I didn't think that was unreasonable, but I didn't understand then how treacherous people could be. Zena and Carla, who have grown up delighting in their father and his organization, recall that their only fear from being raised a Satanist came from outside, from people who were threatened by what their father was trying to do, or who just wanted to give him a bad time. Zena remembers coming home from school with a nut waiting on her front doorstep with a butcher's knife. She had been instructed by her parents, in such an emergency, to keep walking past and pretend she didn't live there. Since then, LaVey, like most celebrities, has established living quarters around the world to which he can retreat so that he is no longer trapped by his own popularity. LaVey grew embittered over the harassment and threats to his family and security. He grew even more wary of his own brewing hostility, recognizing the danger of killing someone with the .45 he carried as a constant companion. As Wolfe relates, LaVey, heeding G.B. Shaw's dictum that the Superman must tread among the mass of humanity, as carefully as though dealing with wild beasts, bore no hopes for kindness or understanding or sensibilities. Living like the lion trainer among his lions, he had his own peculiar faith. A faith in the ability of black magic to change circumstances and the immediate environment, rendering escape unnecessary. After a few years, LaVey began cutting back on the administrative demands on his time, concentrating his energies on his own projects more than on public relations and personally ministering to his ever-increasing flock. Following LaVey's plan, it was time to stop performing Satanism and start practicing it. The Church of Satan was having its impact on the outside world, and LaVey wanted to encourage new directions among the members rather than siphoning off the best energy for a compulsory performance of rituals. The period of actual above-ground activity coming directly from LaVey's Victorian was relatively brief, but long enough to have an irreparable effect on established religion. After that original blast, LaVey remembers, there was no need for the ongoing public spectacle and outrage of an inverted Catholic Mass anymore. Christianity was becoming weaker every day. That was just beating a dead horse. There were plenty of other sacred cows to attack, and that's what keeps Satanism vital and thriving. All weekly public ceremonies in the Black House stopped in 1972. Responsibility for satanic activities was shifted to the dozens of satanic grottos established around the world, with Central Grotto, as LaVey's original Black House was designated, serving only to screen, approve, and direct potential active members in the Church of Satan. By 1975, a reorganization had taken place, and those few who were counterproductive to LaVey's satanic ideals, who were more interested in what Anton calls Phase 1 Satanism, i.e., group rituals, blaspheming Christianity in a rigidly structured, limited way, were phased out. The grotto system was loosely maintained, but no longer strictly managed through Central Grotto. LaVey wanted his Church of Satan to evolve into a truly Kabbalistic underground, rather than degenerating into a long-running public pageant or Satan pen pal club. Putting the brakes on the lodge hall activities, LaVey emphasized that a person's status within the Church of Satan should reflect his status outside the organization. Highest-ranking people in the world outside should hold a commensurate position within the group, since that, LaVey reasons, was the truest measure of how able they were to apply satanic theories of lesser and greater magic for their own benefit. Anton also shifted the organizational focus to those who could benefit the church in a substantial and material way through who and what they were, not just through spending large chunks of time with non-productive psychic vampires, no matter how dedicated. There always has to be a fair exchange, LaVey says. I realized many people were joining our ranks simply because it was a guarantee of friends, or because they wanted the glory of passing tests to earn degrees, much like the lodge hall of grand poobahs, who take off their robes and vestments and become the local plumber again outside their lodge. They were getting more spook appeal out of becoming members of the Church of Satan than we were getting esteem from having them among our membership. As an organization grows, group activities only cause contention, drain vital energy that could be better applied elsewhere, and eventually become counterproductive. Teaching people that they're all right and society is all wrong, that the only ones who really understand them and that they relate to are within the group, is damaging in the long run. It only reinforces their own inability to deal with the larger world. That's one reason why I dissolved the grotto system. I wanted to create a forum, a loosely structured cabal for the productive aliens, not misfits who need to depend on a group. After the reorganization, I was free to be more selective. I would much rather attract and lend support to those individuals who use their alienation, just as most leaders are usually different or distinctive in some way. Groups encourage dependence on beliefs and delusions to reinforce their omnipotence, rather than applying magic on an individual basis, as the Satanic Bible outlines. Instead of fostering self-sufficiency and honest skepticism, I saw my group lapsing into blind belief and unhealthy anthropomorphism. And that's not what I intended, and I had to make moves to get the Church of Satan back on track. Consequently, LaVey devised a diabolical way to clean house, which eventually eliminated much of the dross and administrivia that LaVey felt was obscuring the organization's true destiny. At the same time, LaVey was refocusing priorities within the world he had created. He became more selective about granting interviews, since his doors were no longer open to anyone off the street who wished to drop by for his lectures. Because of this rather abrupt cessation of activity, rumors spread of the end of the Church of Satan and of LaVey's death. Of course, there were those who wanted to continue the group activities. Rather than seeing LaVey's changes as moving the Church of Satan beyond the realm of a cult, where all activity is strictly dictated by a central figure, some members felt betrayed by LaVey for discontinuing their avenue for meeting others of like mind. There were also those who simply felt sour grapes towards LaVey from 1966 on, who felt they could do the same thing, only better. Groups sprouted up around the world once Anton hit the newspapers, many of them claiming a more illustrious satanic pedigree than LaVey's original group, and many started by disgruntled ex-members of the Church of Satan. Church of Satanic Brotherhood, Ordo Templi Satanas, Order of the Black Ram, Temple of Set, Shrine of the Little Mother, Church of Satan, the Church of Satan, Order of Baal, the Satanic Church, the Orthodox Satanic Church, and the Church of Satanic Liberation, to name just a few, that have presented themselves to LaVey. Most of these other groups took on a Laurel and Hardy-like Sons of the Desert quality, and never seemed able to stick together for more than a few years, with infighting and jealousies being constant problems. Some have written disparaging remarks over the years, which LaVey passes off as absurdly self-righteous, and some have reportedly thrown their share of demonic curses in LaVey's direction. Yet, as Arlene Fitzgerald points out in Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sorcery, but were afraid to ask, death spells notwithstanding, Anton LaVey's Satanic Church has gained a certain acceptance and even respectability in American society, thanks to his superb sense of timing. Somehow, the counterculture was ready for a satanic priest, and Anton was ready to proclaim himself Prince of Darkness. San Francisco journalist Merla Zellerbach wrote recently of this modern-day version of Satan incarnate in her Chronicle column. As Miss Zellerbach goes on to observe, every success story has its imitators. But, as yet, no black mass enthusiast has succeeded in posing any serious threat to LaVey in his prominent role as the Advocate's Devil. Despite changes in the structure of his organization, publicity for LaVey hadn't flagged since the mid-50s. In 1975, Dick Russell wrote Anton LaVey, the Satanist who wants to rule the world, a chillingly perceptive article for Argosy magazine, following Anton from Hollywood to Durango for the filming of The Devil's Reign, then finally ending the interview with LaVey in Mexico City. Already, LaVey was being described as all but inaccessible to the public. Moving between 3 California homes and retreats in the eastern U.S. and Europe, he has become an almost mythical recluse. Russell weaves purely personal reactions to LaVey among his abundant facts, blending his article into an almost fictional interpretation of how profoundly he was affected by their meetings. The result is a bewitching portrait of a frighteningly prepossessing man, haunted, supernaturally perceptive, possibly unstable. Uncontrollably, I begin to laugh. Soon Teresina is laughing, and LaVey is laughing, and it seems the whole restaurant, the whole world, must be laughing. There are tears in my eyes when I glance up at him. He's bringing a glass of wine to his lips, grinning like a large whiskered cat. The grin brings me back to reality. In my mind, I try to construct my next question. Do you believe that you will leave your mark on history? The question leaps for me so quickly that it takes LaVey by surprise. He contemplates a moment, then replies, I'd be maudlin to say I didn't. I honestly feel that 100 years from now, when most of these Watergate figures are long forgotten, people will know who Anton LaVey was. Selfish as it may appear on the surface, I also sincerely believe I'm doing something that will elevate man's self-awareness, even if it's a tiny, tiny little step. Fred Hardin's 1979 Hustler article on LaVey acted as a bridge between LaVey's splashy publicity of the 60s and early 70s and what LaVey terms the second wave of Satanism, which began, suitably enough, in 1984. Hardin's detailed article apprised Hustler's readers of some intimate details of LaVey's relationships with Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield, and discussed LaVey's continuing influence in the film industry. For all his strangeness, LaVey remained a strict law and order man, working with police in the investigation of crimes, especially murder, where there emerged signs of witchcraft or demonomania. He does not smoke. He drinks, but not to excess. and he continues to appreciate women, especially well-developed blondes. Far from the scandalous and prankish antics of the 60s, LaVey now stirs his cauldron of satanic witch doctory with a truly evil objective in mind: to make the world a more fit place for devils. We Satanists pride ourselves on being ladies and gentlemen. Sinful ones, perhaps, but nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen.